Let's talk about Middlemarch today, a novel written by George Eliot. But of course, that wasn't her real name. Her real name was Mary Ann Evans. So I want to talk about the author first, then we're going to dive into the background of Middlemarch itself, and then I'm going to share my thoughts. This novel is called one of the best English novels ever written, so my expectations were rather high. Mary Ann Evans was known to keep many commonplace books. She did a lot of research. She loved learning. She loved reading. She was an avid reader. And she had many commonplace books while doing research for Middlemarch. It is said that she kept quotes from poets, historians, playwrights, philosophers, and critics in 8 different languages. So you can safely say that she led an intellectual life. She was also an assistant editor, by the way. Her first 3 novels made her famous. They did really, really well. And at the age of 21, she lost her faith. The reason I mention this is because if you haven't read Middlemarch, you might want to keep an eye open for such a theme in the novel. She had a huge argument with her father because he didn't agree with her. And eventually, they stopped talking, but eventually they made a deal. She would go to church, but she wouldn't receive communion, and she would believe whatever she liked to believe. So that was the deal. And I want you to pay close attention to the role of clergymen and what Eliot thinks that their role should be. She belonged to the upper peasant class, and she received an education. As I mentioned, she was an avid reader and she read books on her own. It's also quite important to know that she lived outside wedlock. So she was living with a married man, which was at the time a quite challenging thing to do. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because you might want to pay attention while reading this novel to Dorothea Brooke and how she resembles Mary Ann Evans. So now let's talk about the novel itself and how it came to be. So Eliot she started thinking about the novel in 1868. And she was already in her 50s when she wrote Middlemarch. It appeared in 8 volumes. The publishing date was 1871 and 72, and it is a work of realism. The story is set in Middlemarch, which is a fictional English town, and it has taken place between 1829 and 1832. From this moment, I will once in a while look down at my notes because I've written down so many things. A lot of things are discussed in this novel: the status of women, the nature of marriage, idealism, self-interest, religion, hypocrisy, political reform, and education. So many things are in here. We also have historical events like the introduction of the railway, for example. What I found really interesting is that we also get a look at early medicine and at the reform of medicine. My cat is here. So the community views medicine in a certain way, and then a certain doctor arrives and he is going to change everything. He's going to change their beliefs and he's trying to make things better. It was very common in publishing back then to split a novel into 3 volumes. But Eliot was worried because her novel was exceeding that 3-volume limit. And so they suggested to her to borrow the technique that Victor Hugo from Paris used for his novels because he exceeded the 3 volumes just as well. So what they did is they published it in 8 2-monthly parts. This is what they also did with Les Misérables. If you haven't read that novel, go and read it. After the death of Thackeray, how do you pronounce it, by the way? Is it Thackeray or Thackeray? I think it's Thackeray. After his death and the death of Dickens, Eliot became recognized as the greatest living English novelist, which she certainly deserved, in my opinion. As you read this novel, you will notice, no doubt, how well read she was. There are so many references to historical figures, other authors, poets, you name it. And I was so impressed while reading this novel. I was constantly thinking, whoa, she must have been so smart. As for the title, Middlemarch, so Middlemarch is a town in which everything takes place, but I have heard that it refers to middle as in middle class, the middle of England, and the middle decade, and then March as in moving forward. As for the plot, it focuses on 4 main plot lines. First of all, we have the life of Dorothea Brooke, and she's also the one opening the novel. Secondly, we have the career of our doctor, Tertius Lydgate. He was actually my personal favorite. Then we have the third plot line, which is that of the courtship of Mary Garth and Fred Vincy. And then the fourth storyline is the secret life of one Nicholas Bulstrode. There are a lot of characters in this book. You can find a sheet on Wikipedia, but of course it is full of spoilers when you go and read the description. I made my own sheet. If you think it would be of use to you, you can download it for free on my Patreon. It's available for free members also. And there are no spoilers as to who is marrying who and so on. It's just a dry character sheet list. And in this way, you won't have to spend time writing down all the different characters. I loved how all of the characters had their dreams and had their own way of chasing them and making them real. They all want to change the world around them, which is pretty interesting. And the characters are extremely complex. It reminded me of Anna Karenina in War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I don't know if I'm the first one who ever made a comparison between George Eliot and Leo Tolstoy, but that's what I'm going to do, because while I was reading the novel, I often made the connection with Tolstoy. I think because the characters, both of their characters are so complex, they're so in-depth, and he's the only one I can think of comparing her with. What I also really loved and appreciated was that the characters have serious flaws. Like, even the characters that you will love, they will all have serious flaws, and that's just amazing. The theme of marriage is just like in Tolstoy's novels, a really important theme. And in Middlemarch, we get case studies of unsuccessful marriages. It is worth noting that George Eliot was rejected by society and by her family after she decided to settle with her not husband, with her lover, and it's just good to keep that in mind while reading the novel. The reviews of this novel were really good. Emily Dickinson expressed high praise for the novel, exclaiming in a letter to a friend, "What do I think of Middlemarch? What do I think of glory?" And later, Virginia Woolf said that it was one of the few novels written for grown-up people. I still don't know what she means by it, even after finishing it. I just really don't. It's even on the back of this Penguin Classics book. She was actually one of the only authors who commented on this work, because it was quite forgotten in the time of Virginia Woolf. It just remained really overlooked at the time. So if you're planning on reading Middlemarch, here are some things that I want you to pay attention to, aside from the things that I already mentioned. Number 1, the contrast between Rosamund Vincy and Dorothea Brooke. Number 2, people have either too much money or too little money, and it is making them miserable. And number 3, the blindness of Dorothea. She doesn't see what is obvious to others. As for the edition that you will choose, it doesn't really matter because it is not translated. It is originally written in English. However, I would recommend getting yourself an edition that feels comfortable, because it is a big book. You're going to spend a lot of time with it. So pick a volume that you adore, that you fall in love with, and that you love holding in your hands. I would like to advise you, by the way, to put a bookmark where the footnotes start, because you're going to flip from the novel to the footnotes a lot, because there are so many footnotes. If you're wondering if you would enjoy this novel, here are some things that you should keep in mind. 1, it is a slow read. Okay, so there's not a lot of action going on, but there is constantly drama going on. If you don't like drama and if you need constant action to pull you forward, then this is going to be a very difficult read for you. Also, to know it is extremely character driven. So I would go as far as to say that if you love realism and Tolstoy, and if you love his complexity of characters like in Anna Karenina and War and Peace, then I'm pretty confident to state that you will enjoy Middlemarch. And finally, of course, you will have to be patient. This is a kind of novel that when you read it again, you will always find something new to love. I would say give it a go. Prepare yourself, maybe find a friend to read it with you and commit to reading a little bit every day. I would say, and I don't know, maybe this is not really good advice, but if you don't like the first 10 chapters, not a lot of things are changing, okay? So if you don't like the start or like the first third of the novel, then I don't think that you will find something to love in the second or third half, because it actually begins in a certain way and it just goes on and on and on until the end. So the impression that you get after reading those first chapters is the overall feel of the novel. I enjoyed every second of Middlemarch, and I hope, if you haven't read it yet, that you will pick up this novel. If you want advice on reading big novels, then I suggest watching this video here.